Agenda item for tonight, and that is to discuss implementation associated with modifications to 516 night parking, and I assume that's an ordinance, Director Bart?
Correct. That's the code section that was recently modified by ordinance at the last meeting. We just wanted to have a chance to discuss it to make sure we're all on the same page. So, correct.
And is there any action for tonight? No.
Not within the committee of the whole, but we are seeking direction on two particular aspects. One related to enforcement that we would like to move forward with, and another related to future direction on budgeting for signage.
Okay.
So it's just a discussion, though. There's no actual action being sought. We would bring those back to the board at November 2nd meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, and who's going to kick off the discussion?
I'd be happy to, if that's acceptable.
Yep, go right ahead.
Okay, so I have a brief presentation, just kind of outlining the memo that I had prepared, as well as the maps that were within the packet. I think they provide a good visual for discussion purposes of what we did pass at the last meeting and how we think we can move forward with that. So let me just share my screen here. Are we all seeing my opening slide, I believe? Okay. So then just as a brief overview, your actions on October 5th, 2020, the meeting, you adopted Ordinance 3013, which will lead towards the implementation of an on-street overnight parking permit to be available January 1st, 2021. You also passed alongside with that alternate side parking with modified hours of midnight till 8 a.m. With the exception of street sections with insufficient width or regulations. We'll talk about those a little more in depth coming up here, but those were the two exceptions. We also adopted Policy 39, which was just an administrative oversight of both the temporary permissions and the on and off street permits that were adopted. And then lastly, the Resolution 2020-30 was adopted to modify the fee schedule for $40 on-street monthly permit and a $30 off-street monthly permit. With regards to implementation of those actions, just want to kind of remind everyone that staff had always sought kind of a two-part approach. First, getting the permit discussion underway and underlined. That what we did adopt expanded the opportunity for those permits to more people, and it reduced the complexity of administration. However, the next step of that implementation had always been suggested to be regulations regarding day, night, alternate side, and winter. And we just did not believe that it was possible to do it all in one package. The previous recommendation also related solely to permitting. So this is kind of a two-part approach that we'd like to enter with all of you. So the first step is to get the permit up and running in January. The second step would be to understand what the capacity is of our streets with respect to that permit demand. Review the context with respect to residential versus commercial areas, if there's any difference needed. Look at our street grid and our street width specifically to what we can handle in terms of regulations, and then update everything based on consistency and comprehension so that it's easy for the public to understand as well as for staff to administer. So that's kind of the two-part approach that we're looking at. The permit is kind of set. There's a couple things of implementation that need to be discussed, and then regulations over the next few months will need to be discussed further. With respect to implementation, we will need to be doing some software upgrades. The board passed direction that an RFP needs to be issued for a new software provider. However, we cannot get that implemented, contracted, and up and running prior to the January 1st implementation deadline that was confirmed last meeting. So we will be utilizing our current provider, Duncan, to get the temporary system up and running. Duncan is unable to limit the number of permits per household. So that is the one limitation that we cannot implement at this time. So if we want to get the permits up and running by January 1st, we need to be clear with communicating that our current provider cannot provide us with that specification. We would expect that the new provider, and maybe Duncan, if they do have modified software, would have that up and running between March and July of next year. Any costs with the upgrade of this software would be split between the parking utility and the general fund. Just as a matter of reference, they would need to be charged in 2020. Once again, we'd make that permit available on or around December 15th so that people have 2 weeks to purchase it so that they're up and running by January 1st of 2021. And in the meantime, staff will be preparing an RFP for citation and parking permit software provider by the end of the year, with the goal of contracting and having that set up between March and July. The next step within my memo relates to street signage. So to implement this prior to the beginning of the new year, we would need to do some street signage. The first aspect would be regarding night permit requirements. We have, if you look at the upper example, we have a few of these kind of signs around the village. The recommendation within the study said that we should implement gateway signage at 9 specific locations. We would probably use this as a model, but we'd also, update it to be more relevant currently. So, no parking on any village street 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. without a permit. I mean, it should be clarified that you can get a permit. So we'd be looking at approximately 9 gateway signs for $3,000. We would need your permission to spend that money over the Village Initiative Capital Fund. Unless there's objection to that, we would be seeking direction to bring that back to you November 2nd for permission to utilize that funding. And then secondly, with alternate side requirements that were adopted, as a reference, we did modify the current regulations, which would have said Monday and Wednesday or Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. Now we've amended that to be you park on the odd side on odd days and the even side on even days. We do have approximately 104 street signs, like the bottom example on Oakland and Capitol, that have those side specific days. So we would need to cover up the Monday and Wednesday line of that. And or cover up the full thing so that we have, nothing specific on that sign. It could be done with some sort of white bumper kind of sticker to cover that up. I don't have the full answer on how to best do that, but we are budgeting approximately $2,000 for that. Once again, that would need to be done this year prior to implementation. So we would be looking for permission from the Village Initiative Capital Fund to spend that money. There was no recommendation in the study for general signage related to alternate side parking. So we would be looking at that in the next 6 months to identify whether or not more specific signage needs to be implemented, but that could be spent out of 2021's budget allocation for the initiative. So with respect to President Rosick's question, we will be seeking, after my presentation here, seeking just your thoughts and permission to bring that back to spend that money at the next meeting. The next step that we have to discuss tonight is enforcement. So enforcement is required to assure and improve compliance with the regulations. With the night parking requirements, there is no interruption in that service. So currently you have to have that permit and or get a temporary permission. So nothing really changes with respect to that. It's just a matter of how you get your permit. So it's our expectation that'd be relatively seamless without interruption with respect to having a permit to park at night. Where things are somewhat different are alternate side requirements. So this would apply to street segments with adequate width and regulation. So that's how it was adopted. Under the current scheme where we have winter parking, that's largely limited by our current winter regulations, which cover a vast majority of the village. So between December and March 1st, alternate side parking with the current scheme would not work. We are not recommending a rush to change winter regulations because we believe more site-specific information is necessary with related capacity numbers. So we would not recommend changing anything. But with that, we're just providing you the oversight that alternate side parking really would not be available to most streets probably until March 1st when that regulation goes away. The study did recommend that we provide first-time offense warnings to people. So, as we roll this out, it's going to be a communication task for our parking enforcement personnel to work with people on understanding it. And then the one question that we really do have tonight is what was adopted last meeting was a midnight till 8 a.m. village-wide restriction. However, we as staff believe that's problematic for the business district, particularly businesses that would stay open later at night, bars and restaurants past midnight or have employees there, and or businesses that open early in the morning, coffee shops, bakeries, things like that. We don't have to burden, people visiting the village to either work or to be a customer or business to have that. So we think that time frame currently is not advisable. Within the memo, I provided 3 options. The first one being a direction to ease enforcement. That is not preferred. We would like to have more clear direction. We have not enforced the current regulation, but that's not our ideal situation to have something on the books that we're not enforcing. So With that, there were two options provided. One would be to modify the ordinance consistent with the permitting requirements of 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. We'd be willing to look at expanded hours when we come back to this in 6 months, but we think that's the cleanest way to communicate with everyone and for people to understand is that this regulation applies to the same time as the permit requirement. Alternately, if for some reason the board wanted to maintain those hours, at a minimum, we would request that different hours be adopted in the business district. That's not preferred because once again, communication gets tricky when you have to tell people what streets apply to where. But if for some reason the midnight to 8 a.m. was desired, we would seek that as a minimum. We are recommending the consistent village-wide 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. So that's kind of the third question that we're seeking. I did prepare some slides kind of to provide you with a greater overview of what alternate side parking impacts could look like. And so it's a series of maps that I'll go through real quickly. They're in the packet and many of you have seen them as well. So these blue streets are streets with widths of 34 feet or greater. The analysis suggested that 34 foot was the minimum to allow for year-round alternate side parking. And I will provide the caveat, this map is based on street width, not based on how things are currently signed out there. So it is known that several of these areas also do have winter regulations, which in the future we would look to remove, but just for reference sake of where alternate side parking could work year round based on the 34-foot recommendation, it is limited to these blue streets. And in the bottom right corner, I have an example. I believe this is Stowell Avenue in the southeast section of the village. So this shows the width of the street with 2 parked cars, enough space for a plow to get through, even if cars are parked on both sides by mistake or during the day. So once again, not verified with posted signage of the ordinance, but these blue streets have the width capacity. When I add these green colored streets, these are streets that have widths between 30 and 34 feet. We have allowed parking on both sides of the street in these green colored streets seasonally, so 9 months of the year, not within winter. We do currently, maintain these streets with leaf collection and street sweeping and DPW refuse and recycling operations. It just does get tight. And so these streets seasonally for 9 months of the year could handle alternate side parking as we currently allow it. So in the bottom right, once again, there's a picture of, cars parked on both sides of the streets with a car coming through. This is ideal for slowing down traffic and a safety vehicle could get through there as well as a plow, which just not as free flowing as the previous blue street example. With alternate side parking, the theory would be that DPW could get through at least one side of these streets each of the days to ultimately clear it. So moving forward, we think there's a conversation of alternate side parking being acceptable year round on these streets. But once again, we have to site specific look at that and confirm with DPW their operations. And we're just not prepared to do that right now. But we believe March 1st, alternate side parking could be enforced on these streets. And then lastly, these red streets have widths of 30 feet or under, in which it's not feasible to have alternate side at any point during the year. Once again, based on DPW and public safety operations, we just wouldn't take the risk of clogging those streets up. They're ideal for slowing traffic and keeping a walkable neighborhood feel, but they just don't work from a parking capacity standpoint. So we don't have really an option on these streets for alternate side parking to work. So with respect to what was passed last meeting, we just want to be clear where we think alternate side parking actually is feasible. It's a village-wide regulation, but on many of these streets, we have posted regulations that would, apply to the exception that's provided in the ordinance. So that's kind of my run through on the maps. I've got 2 more quick slides and then I'll open it back up for conversation. With regard to implementation, after tonight's meeting, we will develop a communication plan primarily through customer service in the police department. Obviously, customer service is busy working an election right now, so it's not ideal. So we probably bring this back in November. We bring it to you for reference in terms of what we're doing and how we can help get the word out and vice versa. There's opportunities for communication via our website, flyers, village managers, memo articles. The Shorewood Today is looking to do an article on this. Social media channels, obviously, we can do targeted email blasts to people who have.
Oh, it looks like Bart froze.
Permits that should be really frozen.
Go ahead.
Am I still?
You're okay now.
Am I back?
Yes.
Oh, okay. A postcard is a possibility to send to everyone, relaying the opportunity for the purchase of a permit. Flyers on parked vehicles is what the city of Milwaukee has done in my neighborhood. They were flyering them prior to the implementation of these new regulations. And then we could always put in temporary signs if we find, hot spots or areas that people need just greater communication on. But our communication plan will be developed and brought back to you in November for reference. And just so if you're thinking of other ideas or if you think some of these will or won't work, we're happy to discuss them. And then lastly, so these are the actions that we're looking for tonight. We're looking to modify the alternate or direction to modify alternate side parking regulations to be consistent with permit requirements. And then in terms of future actions within our 6-month review, we would review location specific capacity issues with DPW operations. If by chance we find in January, February, March that certain streets just are not working, our code does allow for temporary regulations to be updated. So we're not suggesting we have to wait 6 months to fix some of these problems, but we just think it's going to take 6 months to identify the full impact. We look at street specific signage. Like I said, the blue streets on those maps probably shouldn't have winter regulations now, but they do. How that happened, we don't know. Over time, things just get regulated based on requests sometimes without much comprehension necessarily to how it fits the overall scheme. We would look back at considered expanded alternate side regulations and whether or not expanding it from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. consistent with the city of Milwaukee might make sense, or if there is a reason in the neighborhoods why midnight would work, we're happy to look at that. And then lastly, we'd be exploring additional winter regulations and topics. The concept of snow emergencies like Milwaukee does, fine adjustments so that people understand the severity of the impact. Towing regulations, we currently don't believe that we have the authority to tow someone who's parked, illegally and is impacting snow clearance or public safety operations. And then a discussion of street clearance expectations that, it might take more than one pass in some of these locations if we allow parking on alternate sides. But we don't really know that information quite yet. So with that, I'm happy to review anything or turn it back over for discussion on anything that I've discussed, primarily related to enforcement and alternate side parking and signage is what we're here to, to go over. So I will turn it back over to President Rozek.
Thank you, Director Bart. I am going to go around the table because I'm pretty sure everyone is going to have some questions rather than just have a free-flowing conversation. So I'll start with Trustee Carpenter.
Thank you. So I have a couple of questions. I'll start first with the business district, which I think is more of just a comment. I think that it is reasonable that there is different regulations in the business district than in the rest of the village for residential. And so I think that that's something that I would feel comfortable with us moving forward with. I did have a financial question about what happens. Bart, you mentioned part of the cost is split between the parking utility for 2020, but what happens moving forward? How do we subsidize or finance the changes in costs? Where is that coming from?
I do believe that we passed money within the 2021 budget for initiative implementation. I think it's $50,000. And so that could cover things from street parking to, transportation implementation. So crosswalks, other things. So we would just be looking to judiciously spend that money in the areas that we see it working with. So in 2021, we can spend that money, but that's not allocated until the next year's budget. So to cover things prior to implementation, we would need to look at that other fund that I mentioned.
Okay. And then you mentioned the signage at the entry of at the various entry points in the village. Does that mean that on each street that there's not going to be a sign that specifically says, alternate side of the street parking? Like how, if you're, not from here and if you're just visiting, how would you know that?
Correct. That's a great question. Like I've mentioned before, we currently have this in the books and there is no street signage other than Capitol and Oakland that ever, proclaim that to people. So we'll need to look at how we communicate that best. Obviously, with the permit parkers, you can tell them when they get their permit, make sure that you park alternate sides. But you're right. If you're visiting, you technically need to get a temporary overnight permission to park 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. or get the monthly permit. So in either case, you should be reaching out to us to get permission to park there. And our communication back to you would have that, whether it's through an email communication or, or otherwise. But yeah, if someone parked here illegally without a permit, they also probably might park on the wrong side of the street. But we don't currently have street specific signage that communicates any sort of alternate requirements other than the business district. So we would need to look at how other communities do that and whether or not additional gateway signage or otherwise is needed. But at this time, we're not recommending to move forward with that quite yet.
Okay. I think those are all of my questions for right now.
Thank you, Trustee Carpenter. Trustee Ursink?
I've had the chance to speak with to Bart as well as Rebecca about this, and I feel pretty comfortable with everything as is. I'm in favor of the 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. to simplify village-wide times. I think that's a great idea. And then we'll just have to, I think with anything big like this, I think the community it's going to just be like ripping off a Band-Aid. The community will have to figure this out. We'll have to be fairly loose with the residents at first by giving out warnings as far as enforcement. And then, I think then after a while, after a year or so, people will just understand how it goes, and they'll tell, if anybody's coming to visit, I think they'll tell their visitors how to park on the street and what the regulations are here in Shorewood. So, I feel pretty comfortable with this, and I'll let others ask questions.
Thank you, Trustee Ursink. Trustee Stokebrand?
I would also support moving to the 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. And I guess because it's still so complicated, I would wonder about defining a business area versus residential. We're trying to make this simple, unless you make it strictly Oakland Capital versus residential. Is that how you would differentiate between business there? Trustee Carpenter asked about making it, some sort of a dispensation or a different time frame for business versus residential. If it was really simple, I guess I could go with it, but otherwise I'm fine with just overall going with the 3 to 5 instead, because to me that makes it okay for bars and bakery workers, although they may start at 4. But I think maybe going from 3 to 5 will help us eliminate separating up a separate business district. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Stokebrand. Trustee Warren?
Hey, thank you. Sorry, I had to find my unmute button. Yeah, I think that when I look at this, what we're gonna have to do here is really take an iterative approach. I mean, this is a big change, and there's gonna be a lot of change management. So just in terms of, I support, allowing for signage. We want to communicate and we want to make sure people are aware of what's going on. Further to Trustee Stokebrand's point, I think everyone before me's made this point. I think going to 3 to 5 makes sense to me, kind of village wide. I think if we try to separate out what's the business district, what's not, that's going to get confusing quickly. I mean, I'm a block away from Oakland, less than a block. I mean, am I in the business district? I think people will get confused pretty quickly. So I support that. And I think it's also vital that we come back in 6 months and kind of discuss what works, what doesn't work, what we need to do. Can we make this better? I mean, I think right now we're not going to have the perfect solution. I have no problem with saying that, but I think we'll gradually we'll kind of figure out what works and get better as we go forward. But I agree with staff recommendations right now, and I'm supportive of them.
Thank you, Trustee Warren. Trustee Bockhorst?
Thank you. Hey, I just wanted to mention that a couple of you guys don't have your mics muted, so you can hear kind of a din. So yeah, I agree. 3 to 5, fine with that. Visitors will find out from the residents that this exists. And if, if they're at someone's place at 3 a.m, I would put it kind of incumbent upon the person that whom they're with to help them navigate that. The community, this is a smart community. It's a small community. Word travels fast in this community. It's a big change, but it's one that a lot of people have been looking forward to. We've already gotten the information out once, and then the vote was reconsidered, and then we got the information out again. We have time. There's communication plan. That's great. Milwaukee is going through this right now as well, by the way, because even though they've had on the books the alternate side parking, it hasn't been enforced just like Shorewood, but they're also rolling this out. And we have a multitude of modalities to get that out, including Shorewood today. And if there's a sticking point with this board for some reason that we can say, hey, it goes on the cover. If this is that big of a change, that's going to really cause some giant impacts. But I also agree with what Trustee Ursing said. If there's a way to, sorry, that noise is kind of annoying. Whoever's mic that's coming from. There's a way for I forgot what you had said, Trustee Ursing, but warnings, that was it, or something, and also I believe that around the holidays, I don't know when that ends, when we allow on-street parking, if that's like the 5th of January generally. I think it generally used to coincide with the school calendar and stuff like that. So we've got a couple of days, and maybe that would be like Milwaukee, when they've reinstated their parking regulations, which they're just going to be reinstating their overnight parking regulations on November 2nd due to the pandemic. They have been giving warnings to people and letting them know that this is happening. So I'm elated we're doing this. And I'm happy that we all were able to come to an agreement, and I look forward to seeing this implemented. Oh, and I'm also fine with the $5,000 that staff has requested, the $3,000 for signage and the $2,000 for the bumper stickers or whatever it's called.
Thank you, Trustee Bachhorst. Trustee Amenta, and then I will make my comments.
Well, I'm a little, I don't really know what to say. I don't find that this reflects the direction that the board gave at our last meeting. It's kind of like we're right back to where we were before we voted to reconsider. I don't like to go into long descriptions of my previous experience and work experience, but I was in charge of capital facilities planning for Contra Costa County. I don't know, I guess in the 80s sometime. And we wanted to build a building on a parking lot and had to redirect a whole bunch of parking, including like very higher ups, public parking, mostly employee parking though. So I have had experience with parking. And I can tell you that it is a very thorny, knotty subject. And it's one that really, really irks people. And that is why my original suggestion was that we do not do an iterative process. We do not make one change and then make another change a couple months later and another change a couple months later, and then reevaluate and decide we have to throw out those changes and make a completely different change. And as I told Bart and Rebecca, not only is that going to be really irritating to people, but people are then going to look at us and say, what are you doing? Like, you don't know what you're doing. You told us this, now you're saying this. And I'm not, it seems like the will of the board is to go ahead with doing it this way. My feeling is we're going to have some very unhappy residents. We're going to have a lot of complaints. And then when we go ahead and do alternate side or whatever we're going to do with the green streets and the red streets later on, we're going to have even more unhappy people. And I just feel like a much better implementation plan is to figure out how it's going to work, what we have to do to make it work, and do it in one fell swoop and be done with it. So I'm not going to vote against it, because I agree, and we all agree that we want to open up some parking, but I think this implementation plan is going to be a mess. And then it's going to be, we as the elected officials are going to be taking the heat for it. And what are we supposed to say? Well, I didn't want to do it, but I mean, we're not going to put up staff and say, you know, they're the ones who made us do it. We have to make this decision. I think it's the wrong decision.
Thank you, Trustee Amenta. I have, I want to address almost all of the points that Bart had made, so please bear with me. I agree with Trustee Amenta wholeheartedly. I don't think implementation should start until March of 2021, and that would give us enough time to make the changes, get the RFP out, figure out alternative side parking, figure out signage. We can put a placeholder in the budget for such signage, but there are so many holes in this that I see, that I completely agree. By doing it tomorrow or starting before winter, we're gonna have some really pissed off residents. I would never do it this way. So that's first. I would ask my colleagues to consider moving implementation until March 2021. And here are some of the reasons. Duncan is very expensive. When we implemented the change, it was for just those 20, just the fee for the 20 overnight parking passes. Just that small change was thousands of dollars. I don't believe we want to start making overnight parking permit passes available under Duncan, pay them to make that change, and then have the residents not have the household restriction in place so they get used to that. And then in March, when we get the new software, we make a household restriction. Now you're going to piss off every apartment dweller. I'm not taking the heat for that. I don't know that anyone really wants to, but please consider that, because taking an existing software and trying to make it work and paying money to do that is without the restriction that the board had voted for, and then changing on them in March is going to be a nightmare. The 12 to 8 alternative parking, we have to think about the cost of that. The reason right now we have one parking checker, and they go out between 3 and 5 and they give tickets. So anytime you expand that hour, you're going to be, for enforcement purposes, you either need an extra parking checker to go from 12 to 8, or you're going to need at least more money to supplement that parking checker who now has to enforce for longer hours, neither of which I'm comfortable with the budget that we have in front of us this year. So I am completely in favor of keeping it from 3 to 5. It shortens their window to a 2-hour enforcement period. The business district split between the business district and I'm not in favor of having different hours. I think 3 to 5 is what the permit says. I think it's easy. Residents, again, parking is a very thorny subject. The business district spills over. I mean, look at the RCA. I don't know if anyone's, it's starting to move into the business district. What is the business district? Is it the bid boundary? Is it Wilson Drive that also has businesses on it? Is it Trustee Warren's Street that is 1 block away where people park for, to go to Metro Market, or, so I'm on Capitol Drive, my business, and I'm just saying people park on the residential streets because there's only 2 spots in front of my store, as is a lot of the stores on Capitol Drive. So do you then sign those streets as the business district? I would 100% stay away from doing that. I also, I think I heard year-round alternative parking sides of the street. If that's not currently what we have, then I'm not in favor of that. The winter regulations, again, if we waited until a March implementation, one of the main things we were talking about 4.5 years ago when we were talking about parking was changing winter regulations at the same time as the overnight permit parking from December to March to what Milwaukee has, which is whenever snowfall is over 1 inch or 1/2 inch or whatever, staff determines is the right amount, which I would take their recommendation. But it's our climate change has just thrown that off. December to March makes no sense in any regard. We can change that very easily. And if we're changing signage, I think we need to do it all at one time. We're really going to be confusing the residents by doing this in stages. So it says warnings are going to be given out by the parking checkers. I'm all for that. I think that's a great idea. I'm not sure how that's tracked in Duncan. I think with the new software, that would be something that could be programmed in very easily, so that when the parking checker runs that license plate, they know whether or not they have a warning. Possibly we already have that capability, but if we don't, then again, I would wait until our March implementation date with our new software. And then for the streets that have event, if we waited and ordered all our signage at one time, for the streets that are unable to have alternative side parking because they're too narrow in width, I would sign those that no overnight parking even with permits, or on this side of the street or whatever it may be. But those are the ones that I would sign, because that is where it's going to get tricky of, do we have to switch for alternative sides? Everybody else, it's going to be a village-wide, regulation, but there are, I can't remember if it's the green streets or the red streets, but are too narrow. So again, I just, I'm pleading with my board members to understand the implications to the budget, and to more so by implementing today or tomorrow or before winter, we're not ready. We're just simply not ready. And I think staff feels that, and they're trying to be as helpful as possible. So I admire Bart and all of the administration for putting together this presentation. I think it highlights the fact that we're not ready, and that we will confuse the residents and business district beyond. And that's the last thing we want to do with overnight parking. I do also want to reiterate for my last statement that I am 100% proponent for overnight parking. I've pushed for this for 4.5 years to get a permit on the street for on-street parking. It is absolutely an equity issue, and I think that renters have been penalized in our village for years, for 109 years, by not having this opportunity. And so even with that said, I don't want to confuse them. And if we implement a change in Duncan right now that has a household, it doesn't have the household requirement that the board adopted, and then we change that on them in March, we're really gonna, we've just really, the renters are gonna go crazy. And I would too if I was renting. And so I guess my biggest plea is to, I see Trustee Bachhorst, I see your hand. My biggest plea is to wait on implementation until March of 2021. With that, I will open it back up for more discussion. Trustee Bachhorst.
Thank you. So a couple of things. First off, I hear what you're saying, President Rozek. I think the renters would be more upset if they have to wait a couple more months to be able to park on the street and rack up tickets. And it is an equity issue. And to the budget, portion of this, again, we've heard time and time again, why are we relying on a small sector of our village, those who generally, not all renters, but generally can least afford it, to fill our budget gaps for those of us that can afford it. So in all due respect, I think that when we send out the parking passes, anyone who gets one on January 1st, part of the, what's it called? The implementation and communication plan can be, listen, until X date, we have unlimited per household, but just know that change is coming. And that's an easy thing to put in there. We can even have people require them to exit off or sign or do something. I disagree that we're going to be confusing all these Sherwoodians. I know we live in a very highly educated area. And we also have a lot of UWM students. These are not a bunch of dummies here. We have a highly educated municipality. People pay attention to what's important to them. For overnight parking on the street, it's a big change. People will pay attention. People understand that there's no perfect way to roll something new out. Okay. I am elected. I'm the longest standing. I think the second person behind me was elected 2 years after me. We've been yelled at for sillier things than this by a variety of people. I think we all have the chops to handle it and to say, you know what, we get it. And also, I don't know if it was you or Trustee Amenta that brought this up, but it kind of goes down, is incumbent upon us when people start saying, why did you do it this way? And we could either say, oh, I didn't want to do it. It wasn't perfect. Or we can say, you know what? Nothing's perfect. We're doing the best we can. Staff's doing the best we can. We are listening to the community. We really are focusing on equity. We want to ensure that people have parking available. And again, you guys, we went back to the overnight parking regulations a lot quicker than other municipalities have. So we are already penalizing a lot of people. And also, I do want to also ask you guys, because I don't think any of you have ever had to park in a lot in Shorewood, blocks from your house overnight. And if you want to see, I really say walk a day, walk a week, walk 2 weeks in someone's shoes that actually has to go and park blocks from their own home, and then go and move their car at 7 a.m, or or the other kind of things that they have to do, and rack up the parking tickets. So we can do it. It's a smart municipality. We all agreed that we were going to do this January 1st twice now. We had 2 different votes. Okay. We want to talk about unhappy residents. And I think, as Trustee Amenta said, people are going to say, what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. Well, if we rescind this again, I really hope to heck they say that to us, because they will be right. We have promised them twice now, January 1st implementation. So we want to go back on that again, because we can't. Some of you believe that it all has to happen at once. I don't agree with you. Doesn't have to happen at once. It's not a perfect world. Things don't always happen at once. We've seen it time and time again. Okay. I get it. Some of you think that that's how it should happen. Well, that's the reality is it can't. And also, I'm going to remind this board, the reason that it can't all happen at once is because some of you reconsidered that vote as well. We already agreed to go with the other vendor, but then it became, oh, we got to reconsider this. Let's reconsider this. We want to do this. So you kind of have to realize that you made some of those decisions and just, eat some humble pie here. We can go forward. Climate change, yes, is terrible, but this fear-based decision-making that residents are going to be mad. I'm more of an optimist. A lot of residents are going to be elated that they get to park on the street now, our public streets for public parking. And it's a pandemic, you guys. So again, we got to be very considerate of people and their options, and to once again penalize the renters, the 53% of our village, because we as a board can't get our act together or get things done. That's really not for us to burden them. So if we change this again, we will have egg on our face yet again. But again, parking checkers, all that stuff, I'm fine with the 3 to 5. If we want even the 8 hours, the parking checkers don't have to monitor the entire time. They don't. You guys know that. You've all parked, outside of you've had meters run over and stuff like that and haven't gotten a ticket in certain situations. So I'm happy we're doing this. I think we will definitely look foolish if we all of a sudden rescind this because of X, Y, or Z. Doesn't matter the reason, it can be done, and staff says it can be done. So let's go forward.
Thank you, Trustee Amenta, and then Trustee Ursink. Was that your hand? So Trustee Amenta and then Trustee Ursink.
Yeah, as I recall, the last meeting, we said 12 to 8 to give DPW some time in the morning when everyone would be on one side of the street or the other, in order, so there would be at least some time, because frequently they're out plowing at 4, 5, or 6 in the morning. They'll start if it's an overnight snow, to get people to be able to get out for work. So I think the point of taking it to 8 was to to give some functional time for DPW to be able to do the things they need to do. As I recall at the meeting when we discussed this, we asked staff to come back with plans for alternate side of the street parking. Yes, we did not understand, would have been nice to have the information at that point, but we did not understand that there were very few streets that were 34 more feet in width, although 30 to 34. So the blue and the green, I think we could immediately go to alternate side of the street parking, especially since people are already parking on both sides of the street on the green streets. So we asked for that to come back, and we asked for, and I particularly remember Trustee Stokebrand, we talked about winter parking regulations, and Nathan was at the meeting, and Trustee Stokebrand asked for, and I remember, and it's in the minutes that I just read this afternoon, that Nathan said, no, we can't do winter parking because it wasn't agendized. And so we said, we would like you to come back with changes to winter parking. So now we're here. We made a motion for 12 to 8. 4 of us voted for it. Okay, now I can understand the business district 12 isn't going to work for them. Okay, but now we're back to 3 to 5, which was where we were before we voted to reconsider. We're not doing alternate side, which is where we were before we voted to reconsider. We've asked for winter parking changes. They are not here. From the minutes, this is the minutes from July 6th. Some village board members inquired how much staff time it takes to administer the public and private lots. Clerk Breckman will follow up after the meeting. I haven't gotten that. Have you? Some village board members questioned how many cars on the street on average per night. Mr. Griepentraut could provide an estimate after the meeting. I haven't gotten that either. So I'm like, the stuff we asked for in order to make this decision, we've never received. We were uncomfortable with the original decision. We reconsidered, and now we're right back. We're right back. And it's very, very perplexing to me that this is where we've ended up. And although I will not disparage this board and go on about how dysfunctional we are and blah, 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 some other trustees will do, because I'm a member of this board and I think we do work in good faith. And we all vote our conscience and we put the time in. Well, I support this board. I don't go around disparaging it as some other trustees do, but I do feel like this is not what we asked for. This is not going to be the best way to do this. Oh, and I wanted to make a point too about the parking checkers. I mean, they're working an 8-hour shift, right? Just if they're there from 3 to 4, I don't know what they're doing between 12 and 3 and 5 to 8, but they're there for a 12-hour shift. I mean, an 8-hour shift. So if it's from 12 to 8, it actually gives them more time and probably would increase revenue. I don't know that she can get through the entire town in 2 hours. So I don't see that we would have that big of an issue with the checker, because I assume that the person is already working an 8-hour shift. So I'm not sure in terms of going forward. I mean, I'm ready to do alternate side of the street parking on the blue and the green streets. The red streets, you know, I think we're going to have issues with DPW. I don't know how, if they get parked up, which they could easily, because those are areas of town with lots of duplexes. I don't know how the new garbage trucks that we just spent $750,000 a couple of years ago with the arms, not going to work. So I don't know how that's going to work. We have to figure something out. And I don't know how leaf collection is going to work. And I don't know how snow is. We're going to have to do a snow emergency, declare a snow emergency for the red streets, and have everybody has to move their car to a green or a blue street. So, you know, I think there are ways to do this, but it appears that there's not a willingness to do it. So.
Thank you, Trustee Menta. Trustee Ursink.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think to go back to the 3 to 5, you know, I think it's just a simplification. I think what we're trying to do here is simplify all of this, and the 3 to 5 simplifies it to a point where if you're parking even close, like, you know, we're taking account of the business district, because if you go out to, let's say, 3 Lions and you're parked on the street and you're enjoying a beer, all of a sudden, you know, you get a ticket because you're there past midnight and you didn't move your car. So I think, you know, there's some sensitivity there. And then I think we're trying to take into account, well, you have the business district 3 to 5 and everybody else 12 to 8. That just gets really confusing. So I think to simplify it all, 3 to 5 makes the most amount of sense, and makes the most amount of sense to me. Not obviously not everybody, but that's where I come with that. You know, before Trustee or President Rozak, you had said, you know, the staff is probably has questions about this as well as questioning this as well, but they're just going along with what the board wants. So I'd love to ask staff, whether it be Bart or Rebecca, is this something that you guys want to implement Jan 1, or is this something you want to wait on? And Bart, if
Are you
Bart's still on.
asking for the recommendation of staff of what would you recommend implementation date start at?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Rebecca, Bart?
How about Bart?
Sure. I can,
Felix wants to go first.
within the 1.5 to 2 years of the study that I've been working on transportation and parking for, I have heard a lot more requests to get the permit on the street than I have heard requests to change regulations relating to alternate side or winter parking, which once again is why I am comfortable recommending to implement the permit on the street to get people the ability to purchase what they're looking to purchase to park in the village so that we can understand what the capacity is, to better understand how that impacts leaf collection, how that impacts refuse collection, how that impacts snow. To the question of the request to have the number of cars that will park in the street with this, I am honest, and I think I have been honest, I will not have an answer to that question. It's all a projection. Until we actually start offering the ability to purchase this permit, we don't know who's going to take it up. So I am comfortable with implementation date of January 1st. I would have preferred to have more time to, work with a different vendor, but we don't have that. So I'm realistic in saying that the Duncan, workaround for the time being is the best that we can do. But if you're asking my opinion, I would stick with January 1st implementation for the permit purchase and save changes to regulations, which may, confuse people. I take it back. I don't think it will confuse people because we're not changing anything. We're not changing winter. We're not changing no parking on the red streets, quote unquote. So sorry for the long answer, but I would stick with January 1st and utilize Duncan.
And then Rebecca, do you have anything to follow up or add to that?
I agree with Bart based upon what we have gone through. And if there was any desire of the board to wait on implementation of the software, that could not occur. I would not be comfortable with advising that it could be done by March 1st because I don't believe that is realistic. So that would need to be a July 1st. But I agree with Bart. You guys have done a lot of great work. I mean, the permit alone is a huge step forward in the history of parking in the village. And I know that we kind of feel in our conversation that we're past that point, but it is a huge step. We're ready to lean into that. This is, it's not going to get solved overnight. It got this way over 4 decades. I mean, I just threw away, recycled 7 file folders of parking discussion, which has not changed in the village in over 4 decades. So I want to, we're ready. I think you guys have the best team to start tackling this issue. And we recognize that it's not going to be perfect right off the bat, but I don't think that anything that we would come up with in one night will be perfect because we need to allow ourselves the opportunity to lean into the changes, efficiently reflect on them, and continue to work as a team to make good decisions moving forward. And I feel confident in this group to be able to do that. You guys are doing a good job. This is a really tough issue. If someone knew how to solve it all perfectly, they would have done it a long time ago. But gosh darn it, we're, I think, in a great position to give it our best shot because you have I have a motivated board to want to make some changes. And I'm working with this talented staff who is continuing to lean into the ideas and see how it can push our thought process.
Thank you,
Great.
Rebecca.
Oh, sorry. Can I finish real quick?
And Trustee Warren, go ahead.
If there's I don't see Leon on here, but is there DPW staff available on the call?
Yes, Joel Closty, the assistant director, is joining us now.
How you doing, Joel?
Good, I'm here.
Great, and I'm sure it's something that you guys are talking about quite a bit internally on if we go forward with this, how you guys are going to clean the streets, the leaves, the trash. Do you guys have an update maybe for us in regards to all of that? If a 3 to 5 would be better than a 12 to 8, let's say, or if we have a certain time, from 12 to 8 or 3 to 5, is there something that works better for you all, or do you think you feel confident enough in making it work with what we give you guys?
I personally believe that as long as we have the necessary time to do what we need to do, that the actual time doesn't necessarily matter. We can adjust to whatever is created with this parking. You know, I think over the years, DPW has been very good at adjusting and you know, coming up with their own solutions as far as working around vehicles. Fact of the matter is, the more vehicles you put on the street, the harder our jobs become. That's just life. And you know, we've gone through many different variations of how we do things. You know, the three big ones, of course, everybody knows, is garbage collection, leaf collection, and snow plowing, right? So, you know, I think, you know, since I've been here, so this is my 5th year, we've made, you know, multiple adjustments when it comes to snow plowing already. Most of our plowing activities really occur between, you know, 12 and probably 5 a.m. You know, and that was something that didn't really happen too much before I got here. And so, I mean, we're willing to work with this. And I think our big thing is that we don't want to make drastic changes to the current way we do things until we can understand how the parking is really going to affect our operations. You know, so I think it's, you know, something that we want to keep an eye on and make adjustments, you know, carefully and wisely, because I don't think, you know, I don't want to confuse the situation. You know, we've been picking up so-and-so's garbage at 7:35 every day for the last 35 years, right? You know, so whatever we do make a change, it is an adjustment. So.
Thank you, Joel. I really appreciate that. And then just my final comment is, you know, I think, you know, we're not giving the residents of Shorewood enough credit. I don't think they're, you know, confused. That, you know, I think they're very smart, and I think they will figure this out. So I just want to reiterate that, you know, that we've got a very smart group of people here that live here in Shorewood. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Zink. I just want to remind the board, we are going around for a second time. So I'm going to go to Trustee Warren, Trustee Carpenter, Trustee Stokebrand, and then myself. Trustee Warren.
Yeah, maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit based on what you just said, but you know, I'm not trying to be reductionist on this. But I'm just wondering, you know, maybe this is a question for President Rosick as the presiding officer and the staff. You know, are we looking for a straw poll here? Are we looking, what are we looking to achieve out of this? Because, you know, I feel like we've discussed parking for many, many hours, and they've been good discussions, really solid discussions. But I feel like, you know, we each have a clear viewpoint. This is not kind of a new discussion. We each have a clear viewpoint on how we want to proceed. So what is the end game here? Knowing that we have 29 minutes until our village board meeting starts, and maybe I jumped the gun a little bit because we're going back around for a second time, but I was curious.
We're in the middle of going back around the second time, so I will let everybody have their second time, and then Bart has 2 specific questions I think he had mentioned at the very beginning of the meeting. So do you have any? So I think we just have 3 more board members, and then we'll go back to Bart with those 2 questions.
I'm good.
Are you okay? Okay. And then I believe I said Trustee Stokebrand, and then Carpenter. No, Carpenter. Trustee Carpenter, and then Stokebrand, and then myself.
Thank you. I do still really think that the 12 to 8 in the residential areas is really important. I'm just sort of envisioning what would happen with snow removal, and have just some concerns about the number of cars that would be on the street at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and how we would manage snow removal with so many cars if we reduce the alternate side to from 3 to 5. And then I just had one kind of follow-up question about the business district. In my mind, changing the business district, my thoughts were that it would be just Oakland and Capitol. It would not be any peripheral streets, any blocks that, you know, come off of that. But I'm wondering, do we have to have alternate side of the street parking in the business district? Is that necessary?
Bart, what is your recommendation?
I mean, I would probably defer to DPW on that and how that impacts their operations. I don't know that it is necessary minus a snow emergency. kind of situation, but once again, we don't do snow emergencies. So I'm not prepared to answer that question, but it is a wide street, obviously, that I feel could handle that. I think it's preferred perhaps that residential people would park there after daytime regulations expire, so they're not competing with businesses, but at night, it's a good place for them to park and not, impact the neighborhoods. But in terms of whether or not it's necessary for other reasons, I would ask if Joel has any thoughts on that.
Can I interrupt for 1 second? And then Joel, the reason that was stated earlier in one of our discussions is, I think the very first discussion, the business district can't be parked up. So if you allow both sides parking, my first question to staff, which Trustee Menta has pointed out, we never got answered, is on Oakland Avenue, you need to have, you can't give out every space a permit because you need customers to be able to park. And so if you don't do alternative sides of the street, there just needs to be some sort of way that there are signed parking spots that permits are not, overnight permits are not allowed. I mean, customers have to be able to park or the businesses die. So that's one other reason. And then Bart and then Joel, go ahead.
And that's why I clarified that it would be after daytime regulations expire. So we might need to expand the daytime regulation to 9 p.m. so that you can't, a residential parker can't park there before the businesses close. But once again, that's part of a larger review of how best to do it. So just, I acknowledge the fact that we do not want parking permit holders to park there during business hours. We want them to park there overnight when the businesses, are less busy or in need of that space. So I hear your point and I acknowledge it. And I think it needs to be, thought of in a future discussion, but I let Joel speak as well.
Joel.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I mean, if you didn't have alternate side street parking in the business district, the only really concern from an operations point of view is that you would have absolutely zero time to clean one side of the street or the other. I mean, you'd be constantly working around vehicles in hopes that, maybe next time I drive through here, there'll be a few more cars that have left. That's not efficient for us, clearly, but I see a lot of vehicles over the years, just parking on, hard packed snow that's, 15 inches thick, and only because there's constantly vehicles there. It's a bad feeling because that it's like, hey, I really want to get in there and get that clean for those folks, but there is no time to do it.
Thank you. Go ahead, Trustee Carpenter. We're running out of time, so.
No, I think that I will let whoever was next go. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Trustee Stokebrand?
I guess, it just seems to me if we've waited this long and we still got a lot of questions, I would push it all off until we had the software, until we knew where we wanted our signs, until we knew what we were going to do with alternate side. I know we're all smart people, but you know what? It's complicated, or we wouldn't be sitting here with so many questions. This is very nuanced. And I think for people, it's just easier. I know there's a push to just get it in and jump in and start swimming. But I just wonder that in 6 months, when you change everything, how people will feel. I'd feel frustrated, confused, and angry.
Thank you, Trustee Stokebrand. I just want to reiterate, and then we'll go to Bart. I am 100%, I heard what staff said, and I disagree 100%. I think that we're not ready. And as an elected official, I feel that I have a right to say that from the residents' point of view, and as a resident myself and a business owner, to put in regulations and to change them 6 months down the road is really not fair. So saying that, if the board members, if my board members do not concur on pushing off the date of implementation, so we can have a comprehensive parking package until July, as our village manager had suggested would be the correct date, then I would request that the household requirement that Duncan is not going to require until July when we change our vendor, that it go away, because I wouldn't want, if we have a January 1st implementation date, I just see no reason why from January to July we don't need a household requirement, and all of a sudden in July we do. So I would get rid of that. And I also would say 12 to 8 would be fine with me, as requested or suggested by Trustee Carpenter and Trustee Amenta. If winter regulations were changed to snowfall, when snow falls for a certain amount of inches or half an inch or an inch, rather than between December and March. Because really that's the reason that 12 to 8 is really giving them a lot of time to clear that snow. So those would be my two requests of the board. If the majority of the board's will is to move forward with implementing the permit portion as Director Bart has recommended. I don't think we need the household requirement. I would get rid of it, because doing it for not doing it for 6 months and then all of a sudden implementing it, I feel would be detrimental. And also the 12 to 8 is okay with me, as long as the winter regulation was changed. So saying that,
Can I just make a suggestion? I mean,
and then we'll go to Bart. Just it has to be.
I'd like to just make a suggestion. Bart's talked a lot at this meeting, more than any of the trustees have been able to talk. What if we did a pilot program permit starting January, make very clear to people it's for 3 or 4 months, and that's it, and so we're not committing ourselves, we're giving ourselves a chance to see. And then, and everybody has the understanding that this is a pilot program. Then at the end of 4 months or 5 months, we can take the step that we've been talking about taking with, figuring out the winter parking, figuring out alternate side of street parking, all that stuff. So we can approach it comprehensively. I mean, I'd be okay with doing and I also want to throw in start regulating by the village. So requiring residency, requiring only 2 per household. We need to have that break on and control on it. Okay. So I would be okay with, if it's very clearly communicated that this is a pilot program, just to, and it's going to end at April 30th or whatever, I would be okay with doing that. And the understanding that by the time that we rebid it out, we have a new vendor, we have a software program that works, and we have thought all the other stuff out. Okay, that's my suggestion. And I don't know how other people feel about that.
Well, we're not going to go back around the table because we don't have time. So Director Bart, can you give us the 2 questions, and then we will go around the table one time quickly to answer those 2 questions. We will have this back at the board in November, is that correct?
Correct. So staff preparing to bring this particular question back on November 2nd. We were seeking direction for how to draft it. It relates to enforcement of the alternate side parking as the board had passed at last meeting. The 3 options were to provide direction to ease enforcement and essentially don't enforce what you adopted, to modify the ordinance to be 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. village-wide, or to modify it to exclude the business district and keep the 12 to 8 within the residential area. So we were looking for direction on how to bring that back for decision on November 2nd, realizing that committees of the whole are not the place to make final decisions. So we were seeking conversation with direction on what to bring back for next meeting.
And you've gotten that, or do I need to go? Let me just go around very quickly and ask, is 3 to 5 acceptable? Yes or no? Trustee Carpenter?
No.
Trustee Ursink?
Yes.
Trustee Warren?
Yes.
Trustee Menta?
No.
Trustee Stokebrand?
Yes.
And Trustee Bachhorst?
If staff's okay with it, I'm okay. They're the ones who have to implement and regulate.
Yes or no? Yes.
That's
Okay.
a yes.
Okay.
If staff's okay. It's not a yes or no answer.
I asked for yes or no. Thank you. And my answer is yes. So then the next question, Bart, is, that sounds like the majority. So the next question.
This one was less of a question, perhaps more of a conversation that I think I did hear, that we will bring back permission to budget up to $5,000 for signage changes to implement this prior to January 1st.
Okay, so a yes or no answer, and I'll allow one statement. Make it quick, please. Trustee Carpenter,
Yep, I think that's fine. Thank you.
Trustee Ursink,
Yes, definitely.
Trustee Warren,
Yep, I'm okay with it.
Trustee Menta,
We're not ready to implement, no.
Trustee Stokelbrand,
Yes.
Trustee Bachhorst,
Definitely.
and myself, I agree with Trustee Menta. We're not ready to implement. I would say no. We don't know the amount. As a matter of fact, I put more. Okay, so is there any other questions? Art? Okay, so I think you got some direction there.
Can we talk about my suggestion that we frame this as a pilot program? So people do not have the expectation that this is like, if we change it, then we're not going to be under the gun. Why did you do this? And now you're changing it. I mean,
Okay, thank you. We do, is it 7:14? Is that correct? Am I seeing the time right?
yeah.
Okay. Yes, we can talk about anything any trustee would like on this topic for the next 15 minutes. So Trustee Menta has asked a question. I will go around the table and see if people just try to limit your comments to about a minute if each trustee feels about a pilot program. Trustee Carpenter.
At our call on Friday, we talked a little bit about, or that was sort of my thought actually, was that especially with the wider streets, that we would sort of start with the 34-foot wide streets and then kind of go from there. I am not opposed to this idea. I just have some concerns that we've already said we're moving forward with all of this, and now we're sort of backtracking. So I do think that, as Rebecca said, that there's a lot of changes that have taken a long time to implement. This may help sort of ease into some of those changes and help residents realize that, like, we aren't totally just ripping off the Band-Aid, that we are taking some steps forward, and we may have to take, you know, a step back to adjust. So I'm medium, I guess is
Okay.
my answer.
Trustee Ursink.
I'm in favor of moving forward with this with parking as is. I think it's something the residents want. It's something the staff wants. I think there's a good plan here drawn up. I think we just need to adapt and adjust if not, you know, when necessary. And we need to not worry so much about what the community thinks about us, because we're here, we're doing the work, and they're not going to like everything that we do, obviously. So I think after all this time talking about this project, I want to listen to the staff who are the experts on this matter, and I want to move forward with what they want and what they're asking for us to move forward with, and then we can just move on from parking.
Okay, so no to the pilot. Thank you, Trustee Ursink. Trustee Stokelbrand.
I think calling it a pilot project is a good idea because it gives people a cue that things are going to change. And it sounds to me like we have so many unknowns. We don't even have the software yet. So this is definitely going to change. We're going to start to look at households. And so I think pilot is a good idea. Call it a pilot.
Thank you. Trustee Bachhorst.
Absolutely opposed to it. This board doesn't get done the amount of work that we have on our agenda. We've come back, and it sounds like if we call this a pilot program, we're going to have another discussion again. We can make decisions, and I agree with what Trustee Ursink said. We can take the heat. The community, you know, understands that they can come to us. We're elected to do that. Not everyone knows what a pilot program is. So you guys going to market this separately, that it's pilot program, it's going to change. I mean, we can still say that this is subject to change, and we could say that in big, bold letters, but pilot is usually a weak thing when you're like, I don't know if this is going to work. We want to claw it back at some point. I don't think anyone on this board wants to claw back the parking program changes, but I could be wrong. And also, when we make policy, again, we need to ask, for what purpose do we have it and who does it serve? So I would be more if we're looking to roll it out incrementally, which I know a lot of you guys said you didn't want to do and you didn't want to make changes, but calling it a pilot program goes 180 for what I heard from a variety of you before, as far as, you know, so I'd be more inclined to say if we want to start simpler, okay, because of the software and all this and that, we send out only to people who currently pay for parking permits in village lots, whether or not they're rented. our village lots or their private village lots, and we tell them very explicitly, alternate side parking, those guys are going to listen because they're already doing it. We already know, where they live, all that stuff. We already know how many passes there are, and then we can go from there. So that would be the only change if we were looking to if we were really scared about all these unknowns. To me, that makes a lot more sense than doing the other stuff.
Okay, thank you. I don't think anyone is scared. I think people have stated their reason very.
I've heard fear. Fear means I'm
Thank you
scared.
so much. Trustee Warren?
Thank you. It's funny thinking about, I don't know that I would call it a pilot program, but I think that I'm thinking along some of the same lines that have been expressed here. I don't think that I wouldn't want to give the impression that we're thinking about rolling this back. I think the board is pretty uniform in terms of wanting to move this forward. But I do think that there's an important communication piece where we say, this is going to be something that we revisit down the road, and some things may change about it. So, I don't know that I would call it a pilot and give the impression that we are not in support of overnight parking. But I would support something where we're making clear, hey, we're gonna come back to this. We're gonna have learnings. This is completely new. We haven't done this before, and we've made a ton of progress. So we're gonna come back and we're gonna reevaluate. And there might be certain things that we do and we don't do. But again, the part of the pilot that I struggle with is I think the impression might be out there that in 3 months we take this away, and I certainly would not be supportive of that. That said, I think this is going to evolve and morph over time.
Thank you, Trustee Warren. My only comments are as follows. I am not in support of implementing this incrementally. We've had 109 years, as Rebecca has said, our village manager, of parking one way. I was public safety chair before anyone except, I believe, Trustee Bockhorst was here, correct? She sat with me. And it was a nightmare when we started talking about parking. The residents, I'm okay with giving them more time to hear us discuss it and to hammer out the details. I think it's fair to them because parking is a huge change. So I have no problem. We've been working on this for a year. We've been having the same parking for 109 years. I think that more time is okay, in my opinion. I agree with Trustee Warren in the fact that I don't think a pilot is the right word. If the will of the board, the majority of the board, is to roll it out in phases as has been proposed by staff, then I would make it perfectly clear of what those phases are and what we voted on. So we voted on a new software, and that will not come and be implemented till July. When that happens, we will have a household requirement. We voted on that. So please, if the administration, if the board's will is to go forward with this in phases as recommended by the administration, be as clear as possible of what we voted for and how that will change every step of the way, right from the get-go, because and it needs to go to every household and every business in this village. It's not fair to tell half the village or only parking permit holders. It is parking affects every single person, including visitors. And so the business district should be putting it out, the business district, but that message needs to be crystal clear of what this board has voted for. I agree with everyone on this board that I don't think we want to revisit like we did the parklet pilot program or the bike parking, or I can't remember what it was, or corral pilot program. I don't think that means that we are going to revisit whether or not we want to have overnight parking. I don't think that is wise. I think we need to make the decision and go forward. Implementation for me is the sticky point. I think our details are not, we haven't voted on everything that we need to vote on. And these discussions, I have no problem with having in the public forum like we are today. And so if it took a little longer, I'm okay with that. But again, if the will of the board is to move in phases, then please notify every single person exactly what the phases that have been voted on to date are and when they will occur. And that's my last comment. We do have 7 more minutes, so I will ask the administration if they have any other questions, and then I see Trustee Bockhorst has her hand up. I will see if we have time to go around and have trustees comment once more. Bart or Rebecca.
I just wanted to clarify that I was corrected and well informed during our discussion that it hasn't been just 4 decades, but 109 years.
Thank you.
We've had parking regulations. Just to clear that up. Thank you, Chief Nimmer.
Right. I think I just said that. Okay, so we do have 6 more minutes. Trustee Bachhorst.
So I'm surprised we've had this for 109 years. I didn't really know the ubiquity of cars have existed for 109 years. But, you know, if it's been this way for 109 years and we haven't changed it, probably long overdue, something that's been in existence over a century. I also want to say that I want to ask my board members here also, like, you know, or just remind maybe, it's not up to us to hammer out and micromanage every detail. I think staff has said they're comfortable moving forward. And to me, that means a lot. We have a very highly trained professional staff. We're elected officials. It's not our job to vote on every single aspect of what they do. At some point, micromanaging staff is very detrimental to them getting their own work done. And it's also really bad for morale. So I heard loud and clearly from heads of DPW, heads of planning and development, from our own village manager, that they have the information and that they can make this work. So at some point, I think we need to trust that they actually do. I know President Rozek said that she didn't think staff was ready, but I heard staff say that they were ready. I trust staff. It came out of their mouth. So I know that it's not perfect, you know, but we also have to realize, you guys, let's move forward. We've got a lot of business to do in this village. And I'm excited to know that we're going to get this done. And 109 years with the same parking policy. Wow, that is something to celebrate, that we are finally going to change it. And no, I don't think the public needs us to. I really disagree with whoever it was said that you know, the public wants to hear us talk more about this. I kind of doubt they do. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Allow others before, because we only have 3 more minutes. Does anybody else have any comments? No, with that, and staff has no more questions for us, then I will take a motion to adjourn. And
Second.
okay, so we will adjourn our committee of the whole. It is 7:27 on my computer. And we will take a 10-minute break, and we will adjourn, come back to the Village Hall meeting at 7:50. Is that 7:47?